back with Book 2, Earth. I really don't have anything for an opening monologue, so let's get right to it.
Season 2 opens with the Avatar State, which addresses, well, why it's a bad idea to have Aang be uber powerful all of the time, like he did to turn the tide in the north. While the Avatars at their strongest in the form, calling on the wisdom and power of all of their past lives and the full power of the Avatar spirit, if they are defeated or injured in the form, it can cause the loss of the Avatar cycle permanently. So yeah, it is not a first resort, and as Aang can't control it and in fact fears the abuse of its power, he's not going to use it as such, in spite of the machinations of an Earth general to use it as a weapon in the war, and won't take no for an answer, first attempting to manipulate Aang through his compassion, and when that doesn't work, alongside the failure to consistently draw it out, he threatens Sokka and Katara's lives.
That escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
And as Aang's feelings for Katara have grown immensely, the backlash is catastrophic. This episode also introduces Zuko's sister, Azula, and Azula is a sociopath one bad day away from going completely insane.
Animal, you have lovely eyes. I love red eyes.
Though such is tempered with extreme control and assuredness in her power.
Actually, something I noticed as I was rewatching the series, Azula actually appears long before she's properly introduced, and I'm not talking about last season's finale.
In Zuko's flashback to his fight and dishonor with his father, when the viewpoint pans over to Iroh, she's standing right in front of him, and gleefully watches the one-sided massacre of the battle.
Which, well, yeah, she's clearly characterized as a cruel, self-serving person. It's foreshadowed far before we actually see it from her. Now, if only some of the more common and episode-centric bits had this happening.
And to match that cruelty, she's exceedingly strong, and more than up to displaying that power, being one of only 2 firebenders in the series able to freely wield lightning. She attempts to recruit Zuko and Iroh into her machinations, offering Zuko a chance to return home, only for it to all be a trap, her intent to actually capture and imprison them for their actions against Zhao.
Curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal!
The direct betrayal by their home makes them decide to abandon it more permanently, as Zuko now sees home isn't really there anymore, and Iroh won't abandon the only family he sees as having left. The severing of their top knots a significant symbol of that.
Unfortunately, while this episode gives us a strong opening, it's followed by hippies,
who are escorted by the group through the Cave of Two Lovers, saying it's a shortcut to Amashu,
when they have a flying bison! I think a creature that flies is better than walking through a cave they just got lost in. Oh, that's just plot railroading!
And the hippies part of all this just annoy the crap out of me.
Urge to kill rising.
In part because they are the first characters to legitimately be nothing but imbeciles, reliant and insisting on doing nothing to solve a situation, and just let things happen, which likewise play counterpart to Sokka, to frustration of him and the audience. The only highlight of it is, once more, the developing relationship between Aang and Katara, resulting in the growing affection between the two finally being expressed. Although Zuko begins to see the other side of the war, and the atrocities his homeland has inflicted on others, the difficulty and ostracization he now faces by being amongst them, and how he's not really ready to accept that. So finally, after 18 episodes, Aang returns to Omashu to train under Bumi, only to find the city having been claimed by the Fire Nation. While the group sneaks in, Azula begins to assemble a team of specialists for her plans from old acquaintances of hers, beginning with the gymnast Tai Li, a specialist in acrobatics and disabling enemies with pressure points, who Azula recruits by threatening her life, and the girl Mai, an expert in throwing weapons and tactics, the pair effectively polar opposites. Mai ends up joining them due to a series of circumstances involving her baby brother, who ends up saved by Aang and company. But her thinking they kidnapped him instead during their attempt to evacuate the people by pretending a plague had swept the city, the child accidentally being swept up and such. While the boy's father wants to trade, the new trio intercede on such and make a fight out of it, jeopardizing the boy's safety, and Mai doesn't really seem to care. But the battle shows Azula's trio as an easy match for our heroes. While Aang does manage to meet Bumi, the man's captured status is more so he can wait amongst the enemy for the time to strike, so Aang will need to find someone else to teach him. The swamp is effectively filler about the group getting trapped in hostile marshland after an out-of-nowhere hurricane attacks them to lead them here.
Once again, plot railroading, and the hurricane is never explained. The first season avoided this.
While here, the three end up experiencing hallucinations of those they've lost, forcing them to confront the feelings associated with them, but it was ultimately unneeded, even though Aang first sees allusions to who will teach him earthbending.
Also, hillbilly waterbenders,
who, due to their affinity with the area, have managed to learn how to bend the water in plant life, an esoteric mastery of the discipline that alludes to something we'll see later, that the pure element is not all a bender can affect, but those also bearing it within them. But the episode is more about the lesson that everything is connected, through the metaphor of a giant tree that makes up the entire swamp.
Though there were a bunch of unanswered questions about this one, needlessly so.
And the early side of the season doesn't get much better with Avatar Day, and a city that despises the Avatars due to the actions of Aang's past life, Kyoshi, the one who created the Kyoshi warriors, who, in an act of defiance for her people, caused the death of a past leader of the city. That was in fact a tyrant, and ended a war the man had caused, which the city had then chosen to scapegoat. The circumstances behind such had been lost to time, but it shows how the Avatar's actions, while meant to bring balance, can come to be resented by those without the context to see why they do what they do, and how history can be distorted.
I just don't think it's framed very well, with a lot of poor comedic antics dragging away from the Water Tribe siblings trying to prove Aang's innocence.
As in a raid that's never really explained, Sokka loses his weapons, and his shtick for the entire episode is finding a new defining item. Plus, the detective work is kind of pointless, since it is a kangaroo court.
I say what happened, and then you say what happened, and then I decide who's right.
Made worse with how Aang presents their evidence, that is downright atrocious. Until Kyoshi herself, voiced by Femshep herself, Jennifer Hale, intervenes from the spirit world and possesses Aang, which only happens because of how inept the sequence of events is, and how it's played for comedy, but, well...
This isn't funny!
Or, to use Sokka's description of it,
this is by far the worst town we've ever been to.
So it's once more a subplot carrying it for me.
In that Zuko's begun to use his guise as the Blue Spirit to rob people, as he finds the begging and other acts they've had to resort to in order to survive degrading. Not realizing nor caring that such thievery is less honorable than individuals just being down on their luck, seeing the charity of others worse than taking it for themselves. And stepping once more in the wrong direction as he tries to find a new route for his life to take, and Iroh encouraging him to do things the right way, but all it does is make Zuko separate from him.
So finally we get back on story track with the Blind Bandits, and the greatest earthbender in the world!
Yes, this young girl, Toph Beifong, is Aang's new earthbending master, as she is brilliant at it, having advanced so fast due to instinctual understanding of how Earth works, mainly due to the absence of sight. Toph was born blind, but after an encounter with bestial earthbenders, the Badger Moles, she learned how to see through vibrations in the ground, and through that, how to bend Earth as they did. But while she's brilliant and has snuck out to compete as a fighter, her parents treat her as if she's an invalid, going to shatter any moment of happiness and not even bothering to know the real her, or let anyone outside of their home know she exists, as if she's nothing but a shame to them.
But the obedient little helpless blind girl that you think I am just isn't me. I love fighting. I love being an earthbender. And I'm really, really good at it.
And also because she never really treats her disability as a disability. Thanks to seeing through vibration, it's where she can't see around her. So there's a lot of situations that come up where the group forgets she's blind, or she herself makes a joke about it as it's not a limitation.
An awareness that she'll only ever be her parents' blind little girl after they do learn of her true abilities leads her to rebel and go with Team Avatar, and begin Aang's training, though not without beginning a side plot, where Toph's parents hire a pair she humiliated to track her and bring her home. Toph's presence adds a different form of dynamic with the group, she and Katara not getting along due to how abrasive she can be, while she and Sokka have similar views on humor, and is a bit more lax than the other's seriousness despite being the same age as Aang. Some of that, I guess, being excitement about being able to travel the world after being confined to her parents' home unless she snuck out. Though such isn't immediately followed up on, as first we have an episode dedicated to Zuko trying to find his way in life on his own, without Iroh to help guide him. And it's honestly something he needed, to reassert some of his better nature while that influence isn't present, which happens when he ends up befriending a family as he passes through a village harassed by thugs part of the Earth Kingdom militia. And reminiscing of when he was like the boy he meets, only, more stuck up and a mama's boy.
Then again, when your father's a monster and your sister is following in his footsteps, yeah, probably best to stick close to mom.
The flashbacks also showcase the event that led to Ozai succeeding the throne, after Iroh lost the will to continue the campaign when his son died in this needless war, and Ozai's actions resulting in Zuko's mother being lost to him. For the disrespect Ozai showed to Iroh losing his son makes his father, Azula, demand Zuko's death in response, an eye for an eye philosophy that, it's only Ursa's own actions, prevents from occurring. Ozai already saw Zuko back then as a failure, and was more than willing to kill him. He had his perfect little daughter. He just wanted the throne.
So, as revealed in the comic set after the series, and also an exposition given by Ozai later in a twisted form, Ursa made a deal. She would poison Azula so he would die before Iroh returned, and thus allow Ozai to ascend to the throne. If in return, Zuko was spared, and she would be allowed to leave, as their entire relationship had been forced upon her. She also tried to negotiate it so she would leave with Zuko, but Ozai refused this aspect of it, Ursa relenting in the name of her son's safety. Kind of makes you wonder what might have happened had she tried to seek him out in his exile, and whether that might have changed things.
And yeah, I wonder about these things, as while the series is crafted to need events to go certain ways to progress it naturally, it also leaves in these windows to what could have been that doesn't automatically seem as immediately better alternatives. That's a hallmark of good writing, honestly.
Whereas in bad writing, such alternatives are simply the author's missing these details, and would have actually made things far better. Insert insult directed at the Tyson movies here.
The insight into these dynamics really do wonders for building the scope of this war, and what it's done to Zuko's people before we see it more prominently in the final season, and also to him personally to shape him into the man he is, though also makes us question why he would have wanted all that back in the first place.
'Cause it does seem that Zuko had more freedom to be himself while exiled, but instead spent all his time in the seemingly fruitless search. It's possible the shame more than the reality was what drove him onwards in his quest.
Though sadly what progress Zuko has made seems to have reset to zero by its end. When he fights the soldiers to keep them from harming the kid he's befriended, he ends up revealing his nature as a firebender. And as all of their problems can be traced back to the root of the war, it results in those that were kind and cheered for him to force him out. He may have done the right thing, but as has been the lesson he's suffered under throughout his life, the right thing isn't always the easy thing. While Toph and Katara begin to grate on each other due to Toph's self-centeredness and refusal to be part of the team,
You both need to calm down. Both? I'm completely calm!
Azula shows once more how formidable an adversary she is, by keeping pace with her movements in another of the Fire Nation's steam-powered vehicles, this one meant for speed.
And kind of looks like a steampunk version of the existing Transformer, possibly from the Galaxy Force series. I looked up a bunch of the figures online, but couldn't pin down the one it reminded me of.
But their pursuit is aided by the fact that it's the shedding season for Appa, so it can follow the masses of hair left in his wake, until they wash it all out of him. But in the interim, the titular chase...
Stop that!
...results in everyone becoming vastly exhausted, for their time to rest a continent such becomes less and less sufficient over time, and even traveling into and over mountains doesn't get them far enough to provide such, to the point they start blowing up at each other. This in turn allows Toph to meet Iroh, still on his own, and strike up a friendship with the older man, a dynamic we sadly don't see much of. But Iroh's awesome wisdom does get to Toph about accepting the help of others. The Six unite to force Azula into retreats, but not before Azula deals a significant injury to Iroh, and in his fear of losing the last person in the world that gives a damn about him, Zuko rejects Katara's offer of help and forces them to leave. Too bad, because otherwise it could have been a step to them coming together. Finally, though, Toph begins Aang on learning earthbending, and unlike waterbending, he is going nowhere with it fast, most likely because of the warring ideologies. Like last season with fire, the flowing nature inherent to airbending doesn't mix well with the more direct and stubborn discipline. Air flows, you just need to direct it where it moves, an element of water that probably was why he so easily picked such up. But to move Earth, you can't avoid or move around it to get it to move. You need to push it, force it directly to do as you wish. And it's only due to Sokka ending up in trouble, and all of Aang's alternatives going to naught, does he finally get the resolve to force the Earth to do what he wants. But it is, of course, after Toph Beifong's Mastery of Earth training course from hell. If you don't move rock, you get hit by the hard place.
Guaranteed results in 7 days, or your money back!
Iroh, meanwhile, is cared for by Zuko through his recovery, the younger man asking for assistance in continuing his training, as it's only a matter of time before they're forced into conflict with Azula again.
I know what you're gonna say. She's my sister and I should be trying to get along with her.
No, she's crazy and she needs to go down.
Is it any wonder he's my favorite character?
And Iroh's training of him once more shows a depth of experience that seems otherwise lacking from the Fire Nation. To the point I wonder how things may have gone had Ozai not stolen the throne from him, having learned how to bend lightning from the teachings of waterbenders, for though only the Avatar can learn all of the elements, that doesn't mean the other factions cannot learn from the others and become better for it.
Something that has been lost in the years of war, part of the greater balance of the world that's been thrown out of whack, and something more explored in the Legend of Korra.
Unfortunately, Zuko isn't ready to wield lightning. He requires an assuredness of self and inner calmness that Zuko simply doesn't possess. And while Iroh endeavors to show Zuko lessons from the world to progress him through such, he isn't even able to grasp lightning redirection at this point, as his attempts to prove he is just leads to another failure.
I really liked this one, due to the continuing counterpoint between Aang and Zuko much of the series runs off of, so it doesn't feel as disappointing that the deuteragonists are not yet allies.
But this is where the series leaves the separate but serialized stories behind, and begins the long story arc that lasts the next 11 episodes.
I'd like to spend my vacation at the library!
This calls back to a bit of lore Zhao brought up last season, the library where he learned the identities of the moon and ocean spirits.
Not like I even needed to mention that, as around the time they gained Toph, the show began to add previously on segments to the show's openings. With how serialized the story is, it's not unwarranted, but considering it mostly recaps what happened in the previous damn episode, it ends up irksome when marathoned. Said library ends up found by the group in the middle of a desert, with the assistance of a scholar they encounter who had been looking for the place for years. Unfortunately, those conditions where Toph actually is rendered blind, one of them happens to be on sand, the dispersed nature of the sand grains not allowing the vibrations Toph uses to see, such only coming back distorted. So she's not in good condition while the others search the library for knowledge useful to them, such as a map of the Fire Nation, or even better, an observatory with a full working model of the planet and all of its celestial phenomena, which not only informs them of the timeline until the arrival of Sozin's comet, but of a solar eclipse before it will sap the power of firebenders, and give the best opportunity to defeat Ozai and bring this conflict to a close. But to do that, they need to bring everyone together to prepare for such a counterattack.
Unfortunately, they draw the ire of the place's owner and guardian, a giant owl, by wanting to use the knowledge of the place against others, an event that, once again, would be called back to in The Legend of Korra.
While they barely managed to escape, they unfortunately have lost their ride out of the desert, as Toph was indisposed due to a combination of being on the sand and trying to keep the building from sinking beneath it while the others were inside. A group of thieves came in and abducted Appa.
How they managed to steal away a 10-ton giant bison who can fly is a bit more baffling. I mean, the dude's huge, and the rope they use doesn't seem as if it's that strong.
But the loss hits Aang hard, not just because he's the last piece of his lost home, but by the beast being a spirit animal, it's like he lost a part of himself. It's a dramatic and volatile change that comes over him. We've never seen Aang this reckless and angry before, and he's like it for good reason. But he begins to forget the others in his pain, and leave them behind.
Which admittedly does result in some of Sokka's best bits.
There's water trapped inside these.
I don't know.
Suit yourself. Nothing's quenchier. It's the quenchiest.
Onward, Sail Shuma!
Okay, I think you've had enough.
Who lit Toph on fire?
Aang's loss of morale forces Katara to take charge, managing to get them on the road to Ba Sing Se, after discovering from the sandbenders they encounter that Appa was likely taken there. Aang does not take that revelation well. Iroh's eccentricities reveal that he is part of a secret society called the Order of the White Lotus, its members assisting the two into also making their way to said city. Zuko and Iroh certainly have the easier time of it, the Order of the White Lotus managing to secure them means of travel, while Team Avatar have to take the long route, helping a small group who had their tickets to the city stolen. Fortunately, they end up encountering Suki again, as her faction of the Kyoshi warriors escort more refugees to the city and tags along with them. Though to make things worse, this is where Jet once more enters the picture, having decided to take his band of freedom fighters and dispense justice in Ba Sing Se, ending up in the same ferry as Zuko and collaborating with the fallen prince to score better fruit from the galley. As Team Avatar travels through the pass, however, Sokka ends up overprotective towards Suki, still not having gotten over the incident with Yue, and as he's attracted to the soldier, transfers much of those feelings onto her. Such ends up revealed, along with the attraction between them being mutual, but Sokka's just not ready for that kind of thing right now.
Otherwise, the episode's kind of superfluous. The series could have time-skipped ahead toward their arrival in the next part of the arc, or condensed it into the story of either episode around it. But for the character stuff they give, it's not bad.
Especially since the birth of the couple's baby helps Aang come back to himself, since now that they're close to the city, he is resolved to get Appa back no matter what. And it's certainly better that when the episode originally aired, it was released in tandem with the next episode, The Drill, revolving around another of the Fire Nation's constructs meant to pierce the city's main defense, a massive, thick, all-encompassing wall.
And on that day, the Earth Nation received a grim reminder. We lived in fear of the Fire Nation, and were disgraced to live in these cages we called walls.
Still, you can't help but think the Assault Force was compensating for something with that drill, since Iroh, one of the nation's most intelligent, wise, and capable generals, failed to breach the city walls years before. And now, their technology's advanced to the point their war machine, with planning, is now more than capable of breaking through it. At least if they're not thwarted, which most of the episode ends up being about. This thus being the third military incursion Team Avatar experiences.
And its construction is actually pretty damn impressive for the overall tech level of the world. I kinda doubt we'd be able to build something like that. Well, then again, we don't need to really breach anything like that. And the Avatar world doesn't have to worry about monstrous giants with untold destructive force, nor normal humans being able to become them, right?
Though, sadly, this episode ends up being another instance of those that are not a main cast member are idiots, as the Earth Kingdom military considers such a massive construct not a threat in the slightest, actively rejecting Aang and Company's help until their efforts against the machine fail spectacularly, part of the difficulty in dealing with the Earthbenders, their stubbornness and inability to think of more than direct solutions. Taking inspiration from Ty Lee's disabling of the Earthbender forces, they realize they can take down the machine from within, first trying to cut the braces of the structure, before realizing they don't have enough time nor energy for that. However, some of the things Toph has taught lead to another idea. Weaken the braces, then hit it with a more significant strike. Coupled with Toph and Katara bending the waste products of the drilling process back into the machine to further build straight on its systems, and Aang spears the damn drill with a stone spike to wreck it.
And there was much rejoicing.
Though, despite just saving Walrosa from significant penetration, no one inside seems to want to talk about the war. Hell, most people don't even know there is a war.
How can that be with the massive influx of refugees into the place, and all of the people that also leave and come back to it? I mean, yeah, due to the walled perimeter, the place is effectively its own country, especially once you look at a map of the world to see the real scale of it, and the inner walls segregate the populace. But I think too many people would voice grievances and be in the know for it to be a legitimately keepable secret, even with the secret cabal keeping such under wraps.
But I don't get that either. Just because Ba Sing Se is safe now, doesn't mean it always will be. Half the reason the city stayed safe is because the Fire Nation's forces have been divided in other campaigns, but most other regions have been significantly conquered. The perimeter around the walls is shrinking away, and had Iroh's son not died, he would have been the one to get through and stay within its walls. It's simply blind arrogance to incite such foolishness, as this land can only really remain a safe ground for refugees if awareness of the war remains, and troops and military powers can be gathered without worry of their assault mid-training or development.
Then again, I am not experienced in military matters. I just play a lot of StarCraft. But even those tactically inexperienced in such matters, such as Sokka, who does have an affinity for it, can see this is just leading to the city's fall.
So while part of the arc, the next few episodes just feel like more filler as the group explore the wrongness of the city and its obliviousness to the conflict. Not helped that they're first shepherded by...
Either she's been replaced by a pod person, or someone screwed with her brain. Smiling people frighten me!
The only logic that makes sense to me is in how the city has become such a bastion of order away from the chaos and destruction of the war, that such has become cancerous, and another expression of the balance the Avatar must bring, as it's not just through destruction that tyrants become notorious, but also through manipulation.
My rule will spread quickly across the real world, eventually allowing me to control people's very hearts.
It just gets really creepy and unpleasant, especially since Smiling Lady keeps following them on their initial search, and blockades them from answers that would have gotten them out of the city, and back to preparing for the conflict in a week.
And another thing I don't get? The joke about Team Avatar's confusion over the King's bear, just being a bear instead of an animal fusion. While the creatures can get weird and wild enough in this setting that something so normal would in and of itself be an anomaly,
the problem is the first season of the show had a lot of shown creatures that weren't fusion entities. Hell, the library had normal foxes that were just more intelligent than in reality.
So it's once more the B-plot with Zuko and Iroh that carries me through this, as Jet has caught on from a single, unverifiable instance that the two are firebenders, and proceeds to stalk and antagonize them, and even his followers think him crazy, and just unable to abandon the conflict for the better life promised to them.
And if that's so, if Jet could just not let this go, why didn't he go and join the fucking army in the first place? Yeah, he's young, but he's still a teen, and we've gotten the inference from the preceding parts of the show they've been recruiting younger and younger as it stretched on.
Though the most tragic, emotional, heartbreaking, and one of my favorite moments of the series does occur during this arc. In Tales of Ba Sing Se, a collection of short adventures, one of Iroh's days is spent helping people enjoy as a tribute to the son he could do nothing for. Said day ending with Iroh left alone with his memory, the acting performed by Mako clearly conveying his unending sorrow towards the loss.
Little soldier boy, come marching home. Brave soldier boy comes marching home.
Of course, compounding that was the death of Mako Iwamatsu around the time the episode aired, this segment being in tribute to the man's life and long-lasting works.
But things start to get back on track with Appa's lost days, which chronicle what the giant bison went through while separated from the group. The events revealing that while he eventually escaped his captors, it was not in the best of conditions. Suki encountering him by chance after the events of the Serpent's Pass, and encouraging him to flee and find Aang when Azula likewise tracks him down, leading to her and the other Kyoshi warriors' subjugation. He ends up flying to the Eastern Air Temple and finds a spiritual guru, who will be relevant in a few episodes, who helps him recover from his ordeal. However, it ends up a case of so close and yet so far, as Long Feng, the leader of the Dai Li, who are keeping the war stuff under wraps, captures him just as he finds Aang, which sets the situation back to zero.
And this is officially where the guy's plan becomes asinine. Once he got Appa back, Aang would have less reason to stay if the kingdom wasn't going to help.
Things are going good for Iroh at least, as he gets an offer to run his own shop, while Zuko hears word of Aang being around, setting him off once more on his needless quest, as Jet comes to the others as they put up posters, telling of signs of Appa, to Katara's extreme distrust. Sarge eventually reveals that yes, Jet's had his brain touched in horrible places. Too good for him, I say. But yes, it was all part of a plan to get them out of the city and out of Long Feng's hair.
And as I said, giving them Appa would have pretty much done that for him. Yeah, they still want to see the Earth King, but before this, he wasn't actually an enemy they needed to overcome.
The deprogramming leads them to Lake Laogai and Long Feng's whole evil operation, succeeding in recovering Appa and trashing the place, but not without resulting in Jet's death after he breaks his programming.
And yeah, Jet dies. The only reason we only received Toph's line of, "he's lying," as her earthbending abilities allow her to be a human lie detector, is that Nickelodeon would not let them show him actually dying, despite death and murder being commonplace in the world and elements discussed before this.
I guess it's the difference between intellectually knowing something and having them depict it happen. With the intended age range they were shooting for with the show, for the youngest viewers, that might not have gone over well. Something it redeems his character, but most of it was after he himself was turned into a victim. It also has Iroh finally call out Zuko for his impulsiveness and adherence to standards he has no way of measuring up to, which only by chance has not resulted in his death. An example taken by how recklessly he charged into the facility to get Appa, but with no plan or strategy, only seeing the goal, but with no understanding of what it is he's seeking anymore.
Who are you? And what do you want?
He doesn't know. Still, with Appa freed and now having a reason to wreck Long Feng's couch, they go to the Earth King and try to give their case. And it's not an easy matter, as Long Feng has had weeks to cover up any evidence of their claims, is a more trusted official, and the king has never been out of his castle, so such is an uphill battle due to naivete. And even when they get him on their side, the king has Long Feng arrested by the people loyal to Long Feng.
Yeah, people should have thought better than to do that. As everybody that wasn't in his little group of secret keepers thought better.
Still, it's revealed more information has been kept from them. A message from the aforementioned guru who can assist in learning the Avatar state, word from Toph's parents with her mother in the city, and even information that could lead Sokka and Katara finally to see their father. But it's all to distract them from the bigger issue, as Azula's trio sneaks in under the guise of Kyoshi warriors, and Toph's letter from home was nothing but a trap. Zuko, however, in his exhaustion, has become greatly sick, Iroh saying it's a result of the crisis of self coming to a head. As he recovers, though, he seems like a different person, more calm and assured of himself than he was before, and for the first time since we first met him, he seems happy. Sokka's meeting with his father, Hakoda, goes greatly, the man recognizing the growth he's had, but is the only one of the encounters to go well. As Azula's infiltration allows the Fire Nation to learn of the eclipse in 2 months' time, Toph has to put out all of the stops to escape her captors.
But she does become the first one to learn how to metal bend as a result.
And it's due to her unique sight that she does so, the vibrations allowing her to learn to perceive impurities in the metalworking that still contain earth that can be manipulated, showing that, yes, she really is the world's best earthbender.
I am the greatest earthbender in the world! Don't you two dunderheads ever forget!
But for Aang, the path to learning to control the Avatar state means to open one's chakras by releasing the emotions associated with them, which conflict with the state's operation into the rampancy we've previously seen. Each's release seems surprisingly fast, but as he approaches completing the cleansing, the last means giving up his attachments to others, what binds him. And for Aang, he believes it to mean giving up his love for Katara. And the Guru doesn't understand this, doesn't try to explain to him that those feelings aren't what's restraining him, but his inability to let go of them. Even after reaching this clarity, he'll still love her. A connection is different from a binding, as a bind restrains, holds one back, whereas a connection links one together. Hell, in an earlier clearing of a chakra, they say that. So what clears and controls one cannot block and restrict another if they can all be cleared at the same time.
It's something I have a problem with because, of course, Aang and Katara aren't going to get together until the end of the series. Even as a teenager, and I first was watching this, I knew that because they're still young and inexperienced about expressing that love. But it's a really contrived reason that, to me, contradicts its own assertions, and all tied up so as to keep the Avatar state, what is the wind button otherwise, inaccessible for a little longer. Hell, even Aang is smart enough to see the contradiction and call it out.
3 chakras ago, that was a good thing.
'Cause we'll be shown later, and have been shown, or at least implied before, that past avatars have loved despite mastery of the state. So ultimately, it comes down to this dick out of touch with his humanity despite his wisdom.
And thus why I think Iroh far superior to the guy who's been here 100 years.
Perfection and power are overrated. I think you are very wise to choose happiness and love.
And his inability to explain to a child those feelings are natural, and parting with the obsession with Katara will not change what he feels inside. Katara sees Zuko and tries to warn the officials, but ends up encountering Azula in disguise, and is imprisoned. Aang senses this as he makes the attempt to release the last chakra, and thus pulls a Skywalker and rushes to her aid, despite his training not being done. At this point, Azula officially allies with Long Feng, actually pulling a double cross to subjugate and turn his forces to her own aid.
You've beaten me at my own game.
Don't flatter yourself. You were never even a player.
And once more pull a deception to capture Zuko and Iroh. Iroh, however, isn't taking such lightly for once. Zuko likewise tries to settle things with Azula in his defense, but Earthbender beats fire, and he's imprisoned with Katara. Iroh finds and asks for the assistance of Team Avatar, Toph vouching for him, while Katara is free to vent to Zuko as she sees him as just another source of the misery in the world, despite how he has been shown to also be a victim to it, which, as she calms down, she comes to see. The coup begins, Azula claiming the city for herself, as the trapped pair are rescued, Iroh asking he leave behind the grudge, only for Azula to come and con him once again, with everything he's ever wanted. The crossroads of his destiny, whether he chooses Iroh, or the nation that turns his back on him. And the temptation from the devil is too great. Zuko allies with Azula, the allegiance of forces overpowering Aang, leaving him with only one resort left: abandon his feelings and enter the state.
As planned.
While Iroh's interference allows Katara to rescue him and escape, the strike has left Aang on the verge of death, the Avatar cycle's continuation in question, and the Avatar state, for now, completely lost. All while Zuko is left conflicted over the choice he's made, the assurances by Azula doing nothing to suppress the guilt he now holds.
Avatar Book 2 Earth varies the most in quality. When it's good, it's really good, but when it's not, it can be a chore to sit through.
Thus, while not the weakest season, it is the most unbalanced and erratic in quality, the filler episodes not adding as much as the prior season, in part due to the artificial nature of some of the struggles. But the theme for the season is very much loss, hardship, and failure, which at least these divergences do feed into and inform, as opposed to Book Water's going with the flow. Toph is an excellent addition to the cast, and no one ends up feeling out of character, more cementing themselves or refining a direction to them like the first did. And the stakes certainly went up massively with Azula's introduction, with her winning most of their exchanges.
In another 2 weeks, we will conclude this 3-part look at Avatar with Book 3, Fire. Burn things!